We're all here and ready to go then. So really cool to have you guys here. Everybody's a good representation from everybody in the ecosystem of esports. And I think we'll start to introduce what is esports, first of all, right? It's actually competitive gaming. So people play games professionally. They go around the world, compete in organized competitions for prize money. They get paid salaries from corporate sponsors. And to give you a compensation, the international Dota 2, they have a prize purse of $20 million coming up. And that is the double compared to US Masters in golf. You have viewership ratings in the likes of huge sports competitions of Super Bowl or golf tournaments or the Olympics. So it's really gearing up to be a new market that has a lot of dynamics in it. And I think we'll start to talk about a few topics that what made esports really big and how does it actually compare to traditional sport? Can you do that? We'll talk a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities that lies ahead and what kind of business opportunities that you see in the industry. So Joona, as a former professional player, how would you compare esports to traditional sports?
I guess from like a playing perspective, if you want to take that step first, it's very similar. Kind of, you have to be able to get the 100% out of yourself, right? So when it comes to extracting the performance, very much similar to sports, psychological aspect, nutrition, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of similarities. We're competing against each other. People are watching, and at the end of the day, we're creating entertainment that people are going to be enjoying, right? So, and we are the pioneers right now. Our kids and their kids, they're going to be living around this phenomenon that's known as esports much more than we are right now.
And Galadin, you're a big influencer and live streamer and a YouTuber. You obviously have a lot of interaction with followers and fans of esports. And how would you kind of compare it to if you watch a traditional sports? Or?
I think it's very similar. You have that interaction between the athlete, the performer, and the fans. And it's interesting because computer gaming has been so traditionally something that people do passionately behind closed doors at home. And now you've seen this transition where these esports players are celebrities. They're in front of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people performing. And so there is that added pressure. And they're taken out of what might be their natural element of not being in front of the camera. And suddenly you see them put in front of the camera and they realize they have fans. And that's a shock to a lot of the players that see that they have followers, people that really passionately want to watch them play the game.
And what do you think kind of create that kind of factor where you have a player and a fan and a competition? I mean, from not being from the gaming industry, how would you kind of relate?
Yeah, look, I think if I contrast it to traditional computer games, it's very much about exploring virtual worlds, about playing versus content that's been created for you. And I think the special thing about the synchronous multiplayer games is it's an exploration of humanity and all the frailties of human character. Are people timid? Are they afraid? Do they overreach? Do they overextend? And all the positive sides, do people back up their teammates? All the things which are really around the human story come to the fore when you're watching these esports, just as they do in traditional sports. And I think that's what makes it so compelling. And in a way, because it's that journey, because it's a human journey you're observing, it's one that can go on forever, unlike the traditional content-driven progression systems of many of the traditional computer games. So that for me is what makes it so compelling, both to play and to watch.
And I think that's something for you, Niccolo, as well as, I mean, if you're looking at that progression that you're looking of content, or if you're looking at the competition itself, how would you say that actually, I mean, you have a competition platform, you're a tournament organizer, and how do you see that kind of relate to traditional sports?
The way we look at it is it's very similar to traditional sports when it comes to engagement. We're talking about something that becomes a lifestyle. And we're talking basically about a player that comes into it and ends up basically going through this progression and basing his social relationships around it. And what differs from traditional sports is something that is more business-oriented. So that's what we look at when we evaluate the overall strategy of a company. And that's mainly the fact that you have someone who owns the IP of a game. You have monetization mechanics that are already inside the game, and the longevity of the games is different, and the barrier to entry. So you need basically to approach esports as if it was one big ecosystem instead of being many different sports.
Yeah. So that's an interesting take. I mean, I would argue a lot. I come from sports, and I say all the time, well, it's exactly the same thing, right? You have a player, and you're competing against somebody else, and then you're going to have a player and a fan eventually. You're going to have fans that want to watch other players and how they do it and how you become better, right? And but what you're touching here is something quite interesting, is obviously that the ecosystem, even though it might resemble traditional sports, you have player and you have fans, you have a tournament organizers, broadcasting and production, and a user base and a fan base. You still have a lot of other dynamics, right? You have publishers that actually kind of invents the sport, if you would say, or owns the sport. So how do you think those dynamics kind of changed? Is that actually a difference on what made esports grow up so fast? What made esports really big, actually?
So I think on one side, the nice thing is we're talking about a sport, but anyone can play anywhere in the world at any time. So you're talking about something that at 5 a.m. in the morning, you could play against him and you're in a different continent. This means you don't need infrastructure, and it's basically no barrier to entry. The downside of this is that this sport can change very quickly. And the fact that you have companies that own the IP means that you have someone who's interested in making sure he's the next sport. And the longevity of this sport is not necessarily the same. So you need to go through this challenge of working in an ecosystem where the game might change, and you're not really defended if you work on one single game. You need to work across different games. If you look at teams, that's a little bit what happens. And very interesting thing is monetization. So we discussed it earlier, how to monetize in esports. A little bit because of the target you have. We're talking about kids between 16 and 28, 30 years old. And they're used to have content for free. A lot of the content they have, in order to monetize video on esports, nobody has been successful at it yet, maybe tomorrow. And that's a little bit one of the challenges, also because the sport itself, in this case, has monetization mechanics integrated in it.
So what you're saying basically is that even if you have a resemblance of the ecosystem, there's still challenges on how you create revenue from B2C or other types of revenues that you have in sports that you don't have in esports today, right?
Yeah, so basically I think that's a little bit the point on some parts. It's definitely going to happen because the engagement is there, the lifestyle is there. We're talking about people that change their lifestyle. They change what they do when they wake up. They change how they behave during the day. You're really changing consumer behavior with esports. And it's an integral part of our lifestyle. At the same time, in order to monetize it, you can't simply take the strategies that you have in traditional esports and put them inside esports. You actually need to live with the game developer, the monetization mechanics of the games, and create a benefit to the overall ecosystem.
Okay. And how do you see, what do you, from your experience, like when you started as a YouTuber or influencer, why have you seen such a tremendous growth so quickly, you think, on your follower group?
Well, for me, I focused mostly on mobile gaming, and the last few years of mobile gaming have really been this incredible amount of growth that's come. And just simply live streaming is a new, relatively new platform. You see many, many new live streaming platforms coming out of every year right now. And mobile gaming in general. YouTube also has become a big thing that, I mean, you know, 5 years ago, there wasn't a job called a YouTuber. And now everybody's calling themselves YouTubers, and there's thousands and thousands of channels out there that are promoting these games for different reasons. But it's funny, just to build on what you were saying, to think about the engagement of the viewer. traditional sports, a lot of the people who love watching those games can't or don't play them. Hockey, football, baseball. But with the eSports, most of the viewers are. And most of the viewers already can or do, or if they don't, maybe they will. And it seems like that's a big part of the key to engagement is games that are easy for people that maybe aren't familiar with the games to watch, to become excited about, and maybe to pick up as well.
So if I understand you correctly, I mean, some of the acceleration factors you would say is distribution platforms, it's accessibility, you can play, you can relate very simply, and obviously tournament organizers that creating a competitive format around these games, right? And Joona, you've been traveling, you've been in the esports industry for 15 years almost, and I don't know, how have you seen the progression, the change in the industry since you started out to where it is today, and what do you think is kind of been taking it up to the next level?
I mean, we started off in ballrooms and in basements, of Hyatt hotels back in the days to now we're filling stadiums. We have massive viewership online. I mean, it just all comes down to the fact that a lot of people love to play games, right? And they will eventually, most likely, end up getting into some kind of contact with esports, right? So it's only natural progression to me that it's been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Also, I think the pro that we have with esports is the fact that since so many kids do play and are surrounded by this mean of entertainment, is that we reach and engage with the kind of audience that a lot of companies and brands have a hard time trying to reach, right? So I think we're really building them a channel of how to reach that kind of an audience.
So you could even argue saying that a generation shift is happening as well, where this younger generation is growing up, they have their kids, and kind of that also develops the
It felt like my own kid, like my oldest kid, he loves YouTube and watching games, he watches YouTubers a lot, all that kind of stuff. So for me, he's the kind of kid that's now living in that kind of world that we've been slowly building up to be online. So I think that will only naturally progress as the years go by.
And if you, I mean, obviously, so we're seeing a very quick growth in esports, both in viewership and market cap. It's growing very, very quickly. There's a lot of dynamics that makes this happen, obviously. And Ben, I don't know what you see as from a business opportunity. Is you kind of looking at the whole industry?
Yes. So I think a lot of audiences that doesn't necessarily automatically translate to fantastic business models which are going to generate a lot of money. And in a way, at its heart, in the truest form of competitive esport, the Counter-Strikes and so on, where you can't pay for in-game advantage, in a way, some of the best business models which have powered the phenomenal profit margins at Supercell and King and other businesses. I'm thinking about energy mechanics and boosters and enhancements in the game and basically paying for faster progression or slightly better advantage. Most of those mechanics, which have proved so successful, are not really usable in the purest form of esport. So the things which are used, the decorative items a lot, sometimes extra data around the game can be sold. And then obviously events and so forth and sponsorship in the real world. So I'd say the most lucrative and business models don't yet seem to be latching themselves or finding a happy home in esports. And I think for me, it's the evolution of those monetization models over time to really fully, to get a fair, I'd say a fair allocation, because the time spent and the passion and the engagement is here, and the monetization is getting there, but there is a bit of a delta at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great point actually, because if you look at traditional sports, you're seeing across the board, you say average spending per fan or per sport fan, they say it's $20 to $60 on different sports, whereas esports is very, very low, right? It's around $2 actually. So, but the threshold would be very small with the high growth. But what do you think is kind of, how can you change that dynamics? What do you think is the next step if you say you can't include those kind of business models because that would not support fair competition, right? Which you want in any kind of sport.
I think, well, firstly, I think mobile. I think we've got one bet in that space. This company on the West Coast called Vainglory run one of the most popular sort of mobile esport MOBA games. I think whether it's that one or other games that really manage to leverage the mobile platform, I think that will be a big step forwards in audience and therefore monetization for the successful companies in that space. And I think there will have to be some innovation beyond decorative items in the game, yet they must be very careful, the owners of these brands, not to ruin the core kind of level playing field, which is what creates the platform for this human drama that people love in esports.
And if you look at that kind of challenge opportunity side of esports, and if you're looking at it as a former player or a team owner, how do you look about your business going forward? Are you looking to be acquired by a sports team, or you're going to build home team arenas or merchandising, or how do you look to scale your business as a competitor?
I think that's a question a lot of teams are asking themselves right now. How do we develop really? I think for us, it's a lot about creating a brand that is a synonym here in Finland for esports, basically. That's been our number one goal here for the first year of operations for us. When it comes to building home arenas, I think that's maybe a little ambitious at this point. Maybe it might be something in the future down the line. I think that's something Blizzard, I think, is wanting to do with Overwatch at some point, possibly. Yeah, I mean, in big picture, for us, it's a lot about finding new ways how to engage with that audience that we've had, and how do we reach new ones. That comes through basically utilizing the data we have and utilizing the data other people have, and then just trying to build that ROI for people that are putting money into the things that we do.
And Niccolo, you're seeing, building on the player platform or competition platform or organizer perspective.
For me, the opportunity is simple. Day after day, esports is more accessible to anyone. And if you compare it to what used to be 10 years ago, it was so hard to play one of his video games, to get better at it. Think of internet connections. Think of the creation of content, like streaming or watching a stream. It was almost impossible. And today, accessibility is growing, and is growing day after day, and that's a little bit the opportunity. I think the real challenge is, as we said, monetization. So making sure that you can work on that balance between reach, which is a benefit to the esports ecosystem and to the game developer, and has been prioritized until today, and monetizing. Because if you want to monetize things like content, you most probably will end up reducing the reach, and you need to accept and find a balance in order to do it.
Yeah. And do you think, Ben, would it be a risk to, when you're trying to do these monetization models, would it be a risk to destroy the sport of it, the competition, if you're trying to include new monetization rules, or do you try to resemble that's why they're trying to resemble traditional sports models, or?
Well, certainly the thing I've noticed that there's quite a big religious divide between the genuine cyber athlete and the Candy Crush player. And I think if you were to try to introduce some of those elements, I think you'd get a fairly firm rejection from the pros at the top of the games. So I think the other slight tweak, just to go on business models, is many of the mobile games became very successful on, obviously, intensive Facebook advertising, where you'd show in a Facebook ad and people would click, download the game, be very easy to play, and then they'd start monetizing. And generally, the more competitive multiplayer synchronous games, you're better brought into that game by watching a YouTube influencer or by having friends who play it, who kind of bring you into the game. So I do think these esports games, whilst it is a fast-changing community, they don't ramp up to the top of the charts in the same way that Pokemon Go does. There is a different cadence and a different way that you need to build as a publisher a successful esport. And I think that maturation cycle, once you have built it, is probably very good, because I think we've seen with League of Legends and Counter-Strike, we've seen very, very long and successful franchises built, which will be very, very attractive and will attract more money in from investors like myself. But I think, many of the techniques which have been so successful in other areas of gaming don't work quite so well in this space.
Okay. And do you think there's acceleration factors, what's going to take esports from what it is today? Is it going to become a real spectator sport, or do you think it's going to be the gamers that is going to be the fan base that play their respective games?
Yeah, I think there's a balance between the two. I think that games that are simple enough to watch without deep knowledge of the game make for better spectator sports. One thing that came to mind when we were talking about developers and finding that spot between monetization and that pure esports is Clash Royale, the game that I was recently cast the King's Cup in Los Angeles. It's a game where people can understand without having a deep knowledge about the game, without even being able to play it. They can see it's simple enough for the independent third person who has never played the game to understand what's happening, yet it's also involved and deep enough that the people who play it truly get that extremely strategic esports feel to it, with fast reactions, and the deployment of troops is so precise that there's so many nuances, so much tiny bits of strategy that are involved in there that make it exciting for the players as well. And the monetization of that game allows people to hit that tournament level without ever spending money, yet there is also an opportunity for people who are extremely passionate about the game to take it beyond that. And it's like, for instance, when you saw a lot of World of Warcraft streamed or competitions, most of that's end game play. That's people who've played for months, if not years, to get to the point where they are. Whereas a game like Clash Royale, someone could pick up and play on a regular basis for a couple of months, and they would be at that tournament level. And the tournament level being more of a mid-range, not the very end game play, so that so many more people could get there without having to make a big investment of time or money.
Because we're talking a lot about the publishers and how they can impact with their game around esports, or can they create an esports game, or what is the dynamics of esports? We'll sum up a little bit with, there's actually, for those who don't know, there's huge media corporations like Turner Broadcasting or Time Warner and Modern Times Group that is doing heavy investments into the esports, creating esports leagues and actually putting it on TV as a mainstream sport. Do you think they will find success with that traditional model, or do you think that that's a reach, or that they need to grow from the fan base of the games itself, or? Joona, you go.
I think, well, the one issue we have, I think, with a lot of esports titles is a bit of an oversaturation in content, because that deflates the quality in a sense. I think people are kind of sometimes, we have a lot of the top teams playing one another on a weekly basis. It becomes an issue at some point, right? So what I really want to see especially from a tournament side of things, is for them to cooperate a little bit more, so that we have more of a structure when it comes to a yearly calendar. Because when you compare to esports to traditional sports, it's far easier to explain, a year in hockey, for example, or football or whatever. You know the certain leagues are happening at certain times and so forth. Esports doesn't happen like that. We are right now just a massive amount of content from different organizers, and I think that's a bit of an issue that needs to be addressed in the future for things to progress.
And Niccolo, how do you look at these media corporations that is going into esports?
So I think it's an opportunity, and usually what I do is I compare it to what happened with traditional sports and media rights. If you look at what Sky did in Europe, is whenever they entered the country, they bought the soccer rights, and suddenly they could enter millions of homes almost overnight. And I think you can end up using esports in a similar way. The only issue you have is you can't necessarily bring that audience into that box. You need to use a wider sort of box, which is the overall internet, and you don't necessarily end up monetizing in the same way. I do see why they're trying to do it. I don't think it's necessarily bringing the audience on the cable, but rather being able to keep in touch with an audience that today is not using cable television anymore.
So would you argue that the distribution platforms in that sense would be very important for reaching new fans, or creating an arena of recognition, I suppose is what they're trying to do in some sense, right? Yep. But is the future of esports, is that going to be about the players, about the fans, the user base, the publishers, the monetization? I don't know, where do you see the single-handedly most biggest opportunity in esports today?
I think from my perspective, for the VC, I think the biggest opportunity is to back one of the best games publishers in that space. or if there is an enabling technology play like a FACEIT, which sort of can sit beneath it. That's interesting as well. And obviously Twitch was one of the early kind of venture-backed exits in that mold. I think it is very much the Wild West at the moment. I think there's some people have been kind of in the kind of esports industry, or I remember when they used to refer to it as cyber athletes. This esports term sort of came along a few years ago. There are a lot of people who've been growing up with it, and now suddenly a lot of different organizations, TV companies, football teams, and so on, want to pile in on the act. And there isn't complete clarity, particularly around the media side of this. Really, who owns the content? Is it the game publisher that built the game that's been playing on? Is it the individual streamer that's streaming it? Is it the league which this team is attached to, or is it the event organizer? I think, or is it the channel that it's being broadcast through, YouTube or Instagram or Mob Crush or whatever it might be. So I think the economic incentives of all those different actors, everyone wants the industry to grow, but who's putting the investment behind it and who's getting the ownership and the revenue streams that flow from it, I think that's still very much in flux. And I think over time that will settle. And I think in that time that it is in flux, it's a fantastic opportunity, I'd say, for startups to create very interesting businesses in the space before it sort of crystallizes to a kind of Sky Sports football analogy that Niccolo raised.
Great. Sorry guys, but we have to move a bit forward. Thanks a lot for the great discussion. I hope we all learned a lot about esports. Give a big hand.